Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode from our podcast Land Talks, brought to you by the G20 Global Land Initiative. We are so happy to have with us today Johnny Miller. Let's talk a little bit about using drones for land restoration. Your organization, African Drone, focuses on using drones for good, right? So, how can drone technology play a role in addressing land degradation and aiding restoration efforts across Africa and beyond?
Well, thanks for having me. Drones we consider a leapfrogging technology. Africa is relatively under-resourced. We are using drones to map. We're using drones for journalism. We're using drones to provide evidence. And we're trying to create a network where different organizations can use drones in a democratic way. They're cheap, they're easy to use. We want to create indigenous capacity in Africa without parachuting in from other places to build capacity in Africa. And we see that as solving a whole host of problems, amongst them climate change, land degradation, resilience, flooding issues, desertification. They're basically a cheap way of providing evidence of what's going on the ground. That's how we see drones. So when before you may have needed expensive aircraft or satellite views or even ground-based surveys, now we have this technology, drones, which are relatively accessible, and we help people gain access to the technology and to the equipment through our organization to be able to solve those challenges of climate change, monitoring and evaluating projects that are going on that are solving climate change in a very democratic way, as I said.
Yes.
So that's basically what we're doing.
That's great. So let's talk a little bit about visual storytelling awareness. You have a project called Unequal Scenes, uses photography to tell powerful stories, right? How can visual storytelling help raise awareness about land degradation and inspire action for restoration efforts on a global scale?
So I'm a photographer by trade, and I always see it as a three-part step. If you want to affect action with photography, the first thing you have to do is have people see the problem. And I think that photographers are uniquely positioned more than other creative industries to be able to allow people to see actually what's going on. And by see, we're living in a media-saturated environment. We're scrolling on Instagram. Images are coming at us all the time and really fast. So it's not enough to just see the problem. You also have to make it interesting. So I think that there's a creative eye element in there that's really important. And I think I've hit upon an aesthetic that really works with Unequal Scenes, for example. The second part of that is to make things relevant. So it's see and then make things relevant.
Yeah.
And I think that having an organization or a context that provides some sort of information that makes what you're showing people relevant to their lives is really important. Otherwise, it's just more imagery. It's more static in the sort of internet sphere of your life. And then the third part of that, and by the way, I think making things relevant is the most important part of things.
Of course.
But the last part is to provide people an avenue for action. So to provide them solutions that they can then go towards, and if they don't want to take those solutions, at least they can learn more about them. So you're giving people the agency, once they're interested, to be able to make their own decisions. So I think that's really the three-step process, which is see, make relevant, and then provide avenues for action that communicators are uniquely positioned to be able to support. And I've tried to do that with Unequal Scenes, and it's, I'm happy to say, been very effective. And I feel proud of that because as a photographer, you never want to look an opportunity. You never want to look a gift horse in the face, which is the English expression, but you never want to take an opportunity and waste it.
Yes.
So when the first images of that series went viral, I really thought I have an opportunity here to affect some change in the world and to affect change for good.
Yeah, that's so inspiring. Thank you, Johnny. Let's talk a little bit about community building for change. You're passionate about building communities of communicators to tackle complex problems. How do you see these communities contributing to land restoration and addressing challenges like desertification and degraded ecosystems?
Yeah, land degradation and climate change affect us all. No person is an island. And so I think building communities should be first and foremost for every communicator's plan for how they act, right? I think it sometimes feels like you're living in a silo as a photographer. You're editing by yourself. Sometimes you're taking photos by yourself. But building communities so that you're really not only representing communities accurately, I mean, ethically representing people, understanding what their issues are, and then trying to communicate those issues.
Yes.
But then providing solutions for communities. None of this is done, even though you might be working in the moment in a silo, none of this is done apart from the wider world around us. That is how these interconnected systematic or systemic issues
shouldn't
work.
be separated or something. Everything is just completing the other. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think you could take a philosophical bent on what you just said, or you could even take like a financial bent, or you could take a systems bent in terms of the way that climate is interconnected, not just with emissions, not just with power generation, but with everything that we do. I mean, our system of consumption, our system of love, our system of pretty much everything that we do in society touches on how land is changing us, how we're working within systems that climate change affects. So in terms of the work that African Drone does and the work that I focus on with Unequal Scenes, a lot of which has to do with city issues related to SDGs in terms of equity, but also in terms of sprawl, in terms of resource management. I look at land all the time, and I look at land through the lens of an aerial pilot. A lot of my work is done with drones, but also through the lens of building communities with African Drone and Unequal Scenes so that we can affect more change together.
Perfect. Let's talk a little bit about innovative solutions and partnerships. As a UN Habitat champion and a senior fellow at Code for Africa, how do you bring together technology, innovation, and partnerships to create impactful solutions for land restoration and sustainable development?
Thanks for asking. I think this is a really important question. I oftentimes am not the smartest person in the room. I want to put myself in rooms where I'm not the smartest person. Generally, I feel like the smartest people in the rooms are the climate scientists, the data experts, the researchers, the academics. But the one thing that I do have as a communicator, which I think is really unique, is the ability to synthesize their knowledge to a general audience. And so using technology, as an example with Unequal Scenes, I used drones. So using new technology, novel technology, things that kind of capture the general audience's interest is a really crucial and critical part of that chain of events that leads us to a better future, that leads us to action. Because if you step back for a moment, right, like every one of us is working towards some sort of change that we want to see.
Of course.
Change for the better.
Yes.
And I think that my part of that spectrum of actors, if you want to look at it that way, involves certain tools. It involves cameras, it involves social media, it involves websites, it involves editing, all these sorts of things. And the more I can add tools to my toolbox or use tools that already exist but use them in a novel way that captures people's imagination, the more effective I'll be in my part of the spectrum.
Yes.
So I guess that's how I'm seeing using technology and using innovative techniques to be able to affect the kind of change that I want to see in terms of equity, in terms of a healthier, fairer, more sustainable world.
Okay, great. So looking ahead, what's your vision for integrating technology, storytelling, and community-driven action to combat land degradation and promote restoration efforts globally?
What I want to do is continue working with my excellent partners, not only at Code for Africa /African Drone, UN Habitat, BMW Responsible Leaders, and the Atlantic Fellows Program, of which I'm an Atlantic Fellow. But I would love to create more of a movement, create more of a platform for my own work through Unequal Scenes, and building a community of people who can also contribute. Because right now it's very heavily my voice in terms of my photography, and I think that that's the nature of how photography works. But expanding out into a community movement of people who are interested in seeing a more equitable world and interested in figuring out how to communicate their vision of a more equitable world to people who are in positions of power. And to people who are in positions maybe not of power but have unique knowledge, but they can't communicate that knowledge because they don't know how or they don't have the tools.
So you do a sort of mediation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
really how I see my work
Yeah.
is mediating between the general public and
Yes.
let's call them subject matter experts
Yes.
and people in positions of power.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. My final question, I promise. In your massive experience, what is the one universal truth about restoring land? I mean, what is something you are absolutely certain will happen when land is restored in the type of ecosystem or landscape you're focusing on?
I think the one universal truth that I've found in my life in terms of land has been that land makes everyone feel happy. Not land per se, but the feeling of being on land, healthy land, outside, away from people, away from cities, in a pristine environment where the air is clean and there's green grass growing or trees growing, where there's clean water. Those sorts of things, I think, very fundamentally in our biology make us happy. You know, it makes us
Yeah.
feel human and connected to the earth. I don't think it's that complicated. I think
not.
all of us, right? Like in
Yeah.
our soul, we feel that sort of
Of course.
passion for the land.
Yeah.
So we can talk about policy and data and complicated communications technologies like drones and satellites. But at the heart of it, I think really what drives all of us who are here is this sort of connection to land, which makes us happy. So I guess that's my one universal truth that I've learned, which is it's
What
actually a very
truth.
simple truth.
Yeah, it's very, very hopeful as well. Johnny Miller, it was such a pleasure to have you as a guest in our podcast. And for our audience, thank you very much for listening. Stay tuned for more episodes from Land Talks. See you tomorrow. Bye.